If you need inspiring words, don't do it. That's what Elon Musk advised on entrepreneurship to a group of university students was. Yet, as religious leader Dieter F. Uchtdorf beautifully puts it, the desire to create is one of the deepest yearnings of the human soul. We know of painters, musicians, authors whose art desperately needs to be brought to light, and inventors, researchers, engineers with an incredible urge to realize an idea. But taking the leap to focus our undivided attention on these pursuits is a daunting prospect. If entrepreneurship is so hard, why do we embellish it? How can we have a realistic view of the risks and upside? What lessons can we learn from others who've walked this path? Let's sit and discuss by the fireside.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Fireside, a podcast where we take you on a journey in search of financial independence. So grab your beverage of choice and sit with us by the fireside. I'll be your host for today, and with me, as always, is Jose. Hi, Jose, how are you doing?
I am very well, thank you very much.
Good to hear it, good to hear it. We really enjoyed the interview with Jaime, so today we're putting a spin on our episode and getting some insight from Jose's business background. Before we begin, I want to remind our listeners that we are not financial advisors, and the opinions and thoughts expressed on this show are for entertainment purposes only and do not constitute financial advice. Please consult your financial advisor before entering into any trade. And with that out of the way, Jose, today we're going to talk a bit about entrepreneurship. And maybe most of our listeners wouldn't know, but you are something of entrepreneur yourself, and you've had a lot of experience with this. Before we touch on your background, I want to have a brief discussion on why we are talking about entrepreneurship within the context of the financial independence movement. Jose, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think there's a connection between the two, or not? What are your thoughts on this?
Before we start, I'm very excited to obviously share some of my background, and I think this is a very important subject because I do believe they, to a certain extent, go hand in hand, especially on the concept of independence, right? You know, financial independence, and for a lot of people, being an entrepreneur, being having their own company, is also a type of independence, right? You know, it's a professional independence, work independence. Like there's a lot of people that prefer to work for themselves and have that freedom, and that kind of goes into a very, I think we touched before, the concept of the yearnings of the human soul, and I think that is also one of them. And I think when you put it together with financial independence and the fire movement, I think being an entrepreneur shares a lot of the core aspects of being an entrepreneur and having those also same aspects as in the fire movement. Things like ambition, things like motivation, things like you know, hitting your head on the floor on the wall, and you know, just getting up and keep going, because there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, and things that you thought could be done in a particular way and they can't. And I think those are things that entrepreneurs need to have in order for them to be successful.
Yeah, I agree with that absolutely. I would say some of the traits that are necessary for an entrepreneur and that also are very relevant if you're on your own path towards financial independence also include ownership, responsibility, the ability to think outside the box and break down complex problems. But by no means are we suggesting that if you want to achieve financial independence within a certain time span, that you have to go with starting your own company and selling it or etc. That's not at all what we're saying. But taking an example of someone who maybe have saves up some money and then invests it in some real estate properties like we discussed last week with Jaime, and tries to make their money grow that way. And they also take ownership at the same time of their own spending. So they're very judicious with where they spend their money. And maybe along the way, they're keeping an eye on world news so they can invest their stock portfolio, manage their stock portfolio wisely. All of these things show level of ownership, a level of risk taking that is also common to entrepreneurs, a level of ambition, like you said. So while you don't have to be an entrepreneur to achieve financial independence, certainly it is in many ways a fast track to getting there, but with a higher level of risk, certainly.
Yeah, 100%. It's kind of like almost like a tick box exercise, right? In order for you to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to tick a bunch of boxes, and in order for you to be a successful, fire movement followers, to put it this way, I think though a lot of those check boxes are shared. I think you briefly touched on one where I didn't really think about it in the beginning, but I think makes a lot of sense, which is the thinking outside of the box, right? I think as an entrepreneur, it's a lot of it is easy, especially if you're talking about the startup, for example. Thinking outside of the box is probably one of the most important things you need to do on a daily basis. And in order for you to achieve your financial independence, and obviously I'm here excluding people that have won the Euro Millions or the lottery or whatever it is. I'm thinking more of people that have set up a plan and committed to the plan and thought outside of the box on how they can achieve that plan, either being through investments or through clever savings. Just the other day I was reading an article about a woman. Her name escapes me now, but she became financially independent after 7 years of saving 70% of her wages. So anytime she would get her salary, obviously she had certain conditions that allowed her to do so. So she was, as far as I remember, she wasn't married, so she didn't have a lot of the expenses that married couples with kids have, for example. But again, I think that is a perfect example of thinking outside of the box. She sat down one day, she wrote down a plan, she clearly went through it, and she executed on that plan. And if you think about it, a lot of those things of ambition, commitment, having an objective ahead of you, and fighting for that objective, and all of those are the same, and she has achieved it. And the same way that she has done, I think anyone that sets themselves on those same objectives can also do it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. On that note, and just to wrap up this part of the conversation, there's a podcast that I was one of the first podcasts that I listened to on the fire movement, and I recommend to our listeners to check it out for more stories of people who have achieved financial independence in varied ways. Really, check out Mad Fientist, the podcast. That is madfientist.com. We'll link to it in the episode notes. All right. So moving on, Jose, as I alluded to earlier in the episode intro, you are a man who has started and been involved in various companies. Some of our listeners may have heard of a hot startup called Coverflex that you were one of the founding members of, and
Mhm.
also your own company Animegami. And I'm aware that you were also involved in various projects along your academic journey. So why don't you fill us in a little bit about your entrepreneurial history?
Sure, sure. Happy to do so. So I guess everything goes back to, if I would have to put it as like a starting point. I think I started working as a developer. I wasn't an engineer at the time when I was probably 15 years old. So it was a long, long time ago. I remember that there was a guy. He now lives in Dubai. He was Portuguese. He still is Portuguese. But he even had to come to my house to ask permission to my dad if I would be able, because I was a minor. I couldn't like legally do this kind of stuff. So I remember he came to my house to basically speak with my dad and explain to him like, I'm not a stranger. I've got this project, and at the time this was like a long, long, long time ago. We're talking probably early 2000s, something like that.
Hmm.
And I guess that's where I first started to have a bit of a taste of kind of having my own thing and being in charge of my own time. I think afterwards, I was involved, for those that might remember, the PlayStation had a portable console, the PSP, which was launched
Hmm.
in, again, the early 2000s. And so I was the founder of the first community in Portugal dedicated to the PlayStation Portable. I still remember. Again, I was still a minor, so I printed a bunch of flyers with a friend of mine, and we went to one of the biggest shopping malls here in Porto, and we handed over flyers to the people that were on the queue because it was the launch day. So we thought, okay, the best way for us to get in front of a lot of people was to go to the launch date. So I had already, because I had imported mine from Japan, so I had mine for quite some time, but it wasn't really. And I think this was the first time I started to think again outside of the box of there was something missing. And bear in mind, this is before the concept of startups, before the concept of Facebooks and anything like that. There was none of the type, but there was this kind of constant need to find solutions for a problem. And I think that's why I decided to become an engineer myself. And I think, Miguel, you probably share the same feel. That's what's being an engineer is faced with a problem, you find the solution and you try to find the most efficient solution for that problem. And so I started by creating the first community, which ended up having over 100,000 users, which was
Wow.
crazy when I think back. 100,000, that's a lot of people. And so that was like, I think, my proper first more business experience. Then obviously, uh, I I went to university, and I think it was in university that I met, which became one of my best friends, Marco. Met him on the first year of university, and we both of us, we shared a lot of these kind of urges to do more, to be constantly busy, making things. And he had more of a designer uh, kind of vein, and I had a more of an engineer developer vein. So he said, "It's perfect. You make the design, I make the code. It's gonna be great." So we started
Hmm.
like many people start with a web agency, where we were just making websites for different companies, and this was like early to late 2005. Again, there was no concept of Facebook probably at the time. I think at the time we was like High Five or something like that. It's like
Yeah,
ages
yeah,
ago,
yeah.
ages. Or MySpace even. So you can probably realize how long ago this was. And from there, we started to make a couple of projects. But the problem was that I think this is where I started to realize the concept of money, because until then, a lot of these things I would just make them for the fun of it. Like
Yeah.
I literally love to build stuff. That's what, again, going back to the things we were talking before. Motivation is an incredible, powerful urge, and I was constantly motivated to build, to do more, and to get people to use things. And at some point we started to realize, look, this is great, man, but money is great as well. We kind
Yeah.
of need to start actually making money, not like make a website for the uncle or the friend that gives us enough money to buy a coffee. So that's when we started to think a bit more seriously. It's like, look, why don't we actually try to make something of this? And this was like
And
first.
this was with Marco, right? There was a
Yeah,
venture
this
that
was
you did
Marco.
together. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was a company that we started called Core Creations. It was myself, Marco, another friend of mine, Paolo, and my cousin Bruno. So he joined the company as well. At the time, he was doing a business MBA in one of the Porto schools of business, and he joined kind of trying managing the business. But after a while, so I think we had the business for roughly a year and so here in a couple of months. But again, the problem we had wasn't a company problem, was a Portugal problem. Portugal was just not really there when it came to investment. To investment back in the day was going to a bank and asking for a loan, and you didn't get. I remember we did that. We got a loan from a bank, and a lot of things didn't go according to plan. We were also quite young. I think we were probably 20 years old at the time, and internet is not what it is today where you can find anything you want. So a lot of the stuff we were just figuring it out ourselves, and some stuff didn't work out, and we just decided to kind of stop it and move on to another thing. But what I think the core of it was that I never could actually be not doing something. So as soon as I stopped that project, I started another project with a guy that I met while I was working at Core Creations, a guy called Philippe, and he had a company called Blue Cora, and this was again, it was also a web agency, but he had a bit more of a track record. He made some good money. Fast forward a couple of years, I had the opportunity to move to the UK, and I think that's where really I started to be a bit more involved with the business side of things. And I think it was also at the same time that I realized that before I became an actual, more fully fledged entrepreneur, I had to learn more about being in a business and working with other people. Because for all those projects that I had, I was always the most experienced guy in the business. And if you're the most experienced guy in the business, it's going to be difficult for you to improve yourself because there's nothing else to look up to. So going into these businesses, and especially moving into a country like UK, and a city like London, it was like a slap in the face of just like how much I had to learn, and that was pretty awesome. Uh, Kind of fast forward again, in 2015, I always had the need. I don't think there was one single year where I didn't just have something on the side. Any projects I had, it's like, I'll maybe at some other point in the different podcast I'll talk about them. But I had loads of different little projects, and this little project with ended up becoming a big project was Animegami. So I've always been a massive anime movie gaming geek, like probably a lot of the people are, and I loved collectibles. I really loved to own pieces of memorabilia from games that I've played that had some an emotional connection. And I thought, well, if I have this, I'm pretty sure some other people have. And at the time, I met my girlfriend, which then became my wife. She's from Hong Kong, and in our travels, we started to realize that you could buy things from Asia much cheaper than in the UK, and that was my key point to say, hey, maybe there's something here. Maybe I can use technology to really build something around a market or an industry that is quite, I would say, old fashioned, because at the time, this was like 2015, a lot of the websites you would see selling these kind of products were those like old school websites, aligned to the left, kind of a bit wonky, not great pictures. And so I thought, right, I can definitely use technology to make a business out of this. And that's really what I started to do. So for a long period of time, I was doing my main job like I always had. So, something had to pay the bills. And
Mhm.
as an engineer, I had a good enough salary that I could, dedicate myself to a certain extent to these projects. And Animegami was born. Initially, we only had a couple of employees, but obviously as things started to grow, the business started to scale, and we started to have to hire more people. I couldn't just manage my own job and the company at the same time, so it's just not feasible. And so I started to get some people more for the business side of things that would run the business for me. So I kind of became more of a, at the time I was more like a shareholder slash CTO, building the technology for the people to use, kind of like building the Iron Man for the Tony Starks of the world, or of my company. And and that's kind of like how the business grew. The business is still ongoing now. I'm still a CEO. And the business has
Visit
gone.
Animegami's visit animegami-studios.com. Shameless plug, but it's a great website and a great
Yeah.
business, and you'd be supporting a friend of the podcast.
Woo! Please do.
Not a friend, an actual member of the
A member of.
podcast, a co-host.
Exactly.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
We'll put the links.
it's a
We'll put
great
the links
site.
on the description.
Absolutely, and it's got some really neat tech for the tech geeks. Although it's not visible on the website, but it's powered by a really smart bot that Jose built all by himself.
Yeah, and more recently, just to kind of wrap up the journey, and so that we can go into a couple more details, is the Coverflex. So Coverflex, I think it was my first real kind of entrepreneur end to end. So from in not inception of the idea, because this was an idea that was brought to me to join the project at kind of pre-angel stage. So it's literally
Mhm.
still, that was the only thing that existed was a PowerPoint essentially. And I was invited to join the project as a co-founder and as a CTO. And I was in the UK. The proposal was to come back to Portugal, which I never thought I would. But guess what? I did. I came back, and I'm very happy that I did. And Coverflex was one of the most incredible, fulfilling, rich experiences I've had as a professional. From having to travel to meet investors, to understand what people from the outside think about running a business, dealing with people that were far smarter than I was, and that had far more experience than I did. And there was just like, it was just a gift to be part of that project. And I think that kind of sums up my experience to this date. I've had multiple different levels and multiple different exposures, but what I would say is I think that's where it was rich. I think for me that's why it was rich, because it was so many different experiences. One's from myself doing it everything by myself, from running the business, speaking with investors, other one to have other people speak with investors, and me just focusing on the tech. But it was always kind of the urge of building something, the urge of making a lot of money. That motivation, like, is always there, is always present.
There's a lot to unpack here, and thanks, Jose, for sharing your
Awesome.
path to where you are now. I want to just touch on some points that stood out to me. First of all, is how your teenage years shaped up and already demonstrated your mindset. And I think it really starts with doing something for the love of the thing that you're doing. You didn't start out for the money, and I can tell because we talk a lot about projects and about tech, and I can tell that what drives you isn't the money; it's the passion for the things that you do and for doing something in general, for building things. And then the money, if and when it would come, it's a nice bonus, a nice reward for it. But if you're driven by money, um, eventually you'll run out of fuel. You run out of fuel in the tank. At least that's been my experience. But on the flip side, if you are taking on or starting projects that you want to do, then it's much more likely that you'll run from a place of passion, a place of wanting to work on these things. Case in point, Animegami is literally feels a little bit like an extension of the things that you like and the things that you
Yeah.
enjoy. Like you said, you're a bit of a nerd in manga and anime, etc. And Animegami feels like a love letter to people who like to immerse themselves in that part of the culture, right? In that culture.
100%, 100%. It comes from so Razer. It's a company that makes some of the best
Peripherals,
peripherals. Thank you very much, Miguel.
peripherals,
Peripherals,
blooper.
peripheral. So they make some of the best hardware in the world for
That's
So there's this company called Razer, and they make some of the best hardware and a lot of the software that power a lot of the computers you buy, especially gaming computers. And they have their slogan is "Buy gamers for gamers," and
Mhm.
I think that's an incredible. If you haven't looked into the CEO's path, it's a very similar path. He comes from a background of a gamer that used to love to play games, and he's like, he's from the era of Unreal tournaments and Counter Strikes and so on. So he comes from like the old school, and really that's where this motivation came from. It wasn't really the money. Obviously, the money came, and generally you have someone in the business that is like this person that feeds on making things, and you have other people that feed on kind of, okay, we need to make this business profitable, because it's not just fun and games, it's a business. And so it's quite interesting because that's how I feel as well. It's you start by doing, and if there's anything that I can you know partake to the listeners and give to the listeners is really, if you're going to get onto something, make sure that it's something that fundamentally motivates you, something that if you stop for a second and you say, if I take the money out of the equation, I would still be motivated. And then spend a week or so doing that thing, trying to build it up, trying to plan it up, put it on paper, draw things, make arrows, make little funny stupid drawings and people, and then feel, if you see if you feel the same, because if you do, that is definitely an incredible thing that you found. And how you probably already, if you have listened to any of our previous episodes, I'm more of a risk taker. Miguel is more of a calculated risk taker. I'm more, I wouldn't say I'm not YOLO, but I'm more kind of freestyle. um
It's a balance mix. It's a yin and yang. You're not
yes.
reckless, but you are. If you have, if things make sense in your mind and you have a thesis, it's easier for you to get that conviction and pull the trigger. Whereas for me, I
Yeah.
need to eliminate all sorts of doubts, and then I'll go
Yeah.
forward.
Yes, and I think that's something that I really appreciate in this dynamic that me and myself and Miguel have, where I think Miguel put it as the yin and yang, and I think that makes a lot of sense because it's in that kind of averaging out of extremes that you find a good solution. And so I really love that, and because I'm more of a risk taker, I'm more like, okay, let's just do it, man. Yeah, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Why should we think about the bridge if we don't even know if there's a bridge that we need to cross? So let's go. Mhm.
If we never get to a bridge, does it even exist?
Exactly, there we go. See, yeah, why should we engineer a bridge if we don't need it? Maybe we don't need it.
But you do bring up a good point. For the entrepreneurial mindset, you need to bring people on boards that will challenge you. I've worked in the past in companies where this wasn't the case. The higher level management wanted people who agreed, who were less disruptive on the management side, so that they would remain unchallenged, and that kept things running smoothly up to a point where you realize you've made a costly mistake months down the line. So you need to surround yourself with people who will challenge you and with people who will balance you, like I said. And you shared that in Coverflex, the part of a great part of the value that you derived from it was in being surrounded by people that pushed you in different directions, but also you felt like, hope I'm quoting you somewhat correctly, that you felt that they knew a lot more than you in certain aspects of running a
Yeah.
business. So, aside from a passion for what you would be doing, what do you think, what would you advise that someone would need to have to pursue an idea as a business?
Um, I was just thinking about that as you were talking, and I think one of the things that I'm still working on myself to get better at is um, being challenged. Uh, Being challenged is difficult when you're passionate about something. Passion and being challenged are things that are not always go hand in hand, right? Because if you're so passionate about something and someone comes in and says, I think you're wrong. And you're like, no, like, but I love this. This is so good. This is great. And everyone's like, no, it
This is
just
my
doesn't work. And
baby.
this is exactly, this is my baby. Where were you talking about? My baby is beautiful. And it's like, well, in your eyes, you might be beautiful, but look at this ugly thing. And I'm like, no. So it's difficult. And I'm working on those. And I think one of the first advices I can give is try to do we've talked a lot about we talked a lot about a lot of characteristics that as an entrepreneur you need to have, the thinking outside the box, the you know challenge and be challenged, the risk taker, but also calculated risk taker, so the yin and yang, so all these kind of things. Think about them, write them on a paper, and try to kind of score yourself on a 1 to 10, where you see yourself on something like this. So for example, how well do I deal with risk? If someone tells me, hey, jump off the ledge, how I know I'm not gonna die, so I'm how likely am I to jump? Am I just gonna be like YOLO, woo? Or if I'm gonna be like, all right, what's the distance from the top to the end? The probability. So try to think where you sit on those things, and try to figure out the things that you need to work more on yourself on those aspects. Like for example, for me is the challenging part. I have difficulty to be challenged, not because I think I'm the smarter guy in the room. I know I'm not, but I'm very passionate. And I think I've got sometimes too much passion that makes me a bit blind to certain aspects. And it's really important to have someone else. What I found is that I need someone else that will kind of almost bring me. I need an anchor. I need someone that doesn't let me kind of float away. No, I need someone to just say, okay, hold on, okay, that's great, but let's talk about this. Let's dig a bit deeper. So I think that's probably one of the biggest advices I would give, because these are going to be things that you are not going to figure out in the beginning.
Yeah, and to build upon that, I think the people you pick to be alongside you on this journey, that's probably the second or even the first most important decision. Either that or the actual thing that you want to work on. And from my point of view, I think we should keep in mind how the synergy would be with those people. We've mentioned that those people would have to be vocal when they disagree with you. But of course, that can't be all the value that they contribute to a project, right? There has to be some sort of areas in which they are the same as you, some sort of areas where they are different from you. I'll give an example, because I also think that we have been working really well on the podcast and in our discussion, and I think where we are the same is very important. Is in our work ethic, our interest for the project, and the way that we, for example, collaborate is in our processes, our openness to adapting to each other's preferences, with which kinds of tools we use, etc., and how we convey, how we communicate. So how we can propose new ideas and how we convey disagreements. The level of initiative, for example, I think is uh, balanced. So those are things that, for me, it is important in someone that I collaborate with. That there's an expectation that those would be matched. But where I think there's value in being different, in being opposite, is, for example, how you're more of the go-getter, I'm more of the, hey, let's first do it perfect and then we'll release it. I realized that the our episodes have been getting better and better every session, not even
Yep.
in the way that we manage the content, but also in the actual audio quality, the audio processing, adding the audio track underneath the introduction, adding the introduction. So those are things that, if you're listening from episode 1 to 5, you'll see the gradual improvement.
Yeah. By the
And
way, don't listen to episode 1. Just skip episode 1. It's okay.
and that is because, if it were for me, we would have published this one, or maybe episode 4 would have been episode number 1. But also, we would have never published an episode, a single one. Uh,
Yeah.
and so it's thanks to Jose pushing in that direction of, come on, let's just release something, and then we'll have the commitment to do it regularly. That we are getting going now. We're in 5th episode and counting. So that complement is needed, and you can find it in different ways.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's just like look, just like a relationship, right? If you're in a relationship that it's like that the game, like the tug of war, where you have two extremes pulling and pushing on a rope, and the rope is in the middle, and you want the rope to go into one of the extremes so the other team wins. And it's the same thing, relationships, and it's remarkable how similar relationships are to business relationships. I'm talking about like personal relationships and business relationships. And it's remarkable how close they are, because it's the same thing. If you're in a relationship that tilts more to one side than the other, you're eventually gonna get to a point where you're just gonna you're just not gonna be able to handle it, or you're gonna start to have problems. And it's the same thing with businesses. And these are the things that, as a human being, you don't learn until you go through them. So um I would say probably one other one other advice I would give is that if you don't take risks as well, you never go through the experiences, right? If you're always on the sidelines, you never give yourself to the mistakes. And I've learned more from my mistakes than I've learned from my successes. And so that's something very powerful, very scary, very powerful to have. And those are things that you don't read it on a book. You don't no one can tell you about it, because you need to go through them, right? It's far more difficult to know the things you don't like than the things that you like, right? And because those only come through your
Yeah.
life experience, through going through them. So I think, like, as another point of advice is, if you're thinking of starting something, calculate the risks, but do it, right? But try and do it. Try to at least look back and say, look, I tried, it didn't work, whatever. Right? What did I learn from it? This, and this. All right. When we do the next one, we're going to do it better. And I think the podcast is a great example where, we've done something, we recorded them, we listened to them, we said, look, we didn't like this, this wasn't great, this and this and this. And we improved it, and we kept improving it. And I'm hoping that by episode 10, it's going to be twice as better, and with the twice as much viewers than this one has.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me draw on one of the points that you made about failure, embracing failure, and throwing yourself out there as a sort of a leading point towards the end of our conversation here. In Hollywood and in the media, we often embellish the idea of entrepreneurship, the idea of founding a startup or working on a startup, and taking on that level of risk. I think partly is because of survivorship bias. where we only learned about the startups that succeeded, that made their founders
Yep.
millionaires and etc., and or made a huge impact on the world. Um, but obviously, the path to a successful startup is riddled with failed startups, failed projects. Um, and I'm sure, as you mentioned, you learned a lot from your own failures. So, could you address this embellished notion of this path and share maybe sometimes that for you were a bit harder to deal with, that put you out of your comfort zone, some hard lessons that you learned over the years?
Sure. I can actually start with a data point. 90% of the all startups fail. So what you see is generally only 10% of the ones that succeed. And so obviously that is an incredibly skewed point of view, just to start from that. Then obviously you consume what is given to you, essentially the media, which nowadays you are being fed information. Most of it you're being fed, right, from Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. It's a completely different dynamic. So you, because you're being fed, you're not actually choosing what to watch, right? That information is being handed over to you, and because it's being handed over to
Yeah.
you, you're not the one that decides what you want to watch. Is the app that you're watching. And obviously the app wants the most engagement, and the engagement comes from success stories. From, you're probably not going to read a headline that says startup X failed after 10 million investment, but you're probably going to read one that says startup Y succeeded with 10 million investments. You're more likely to read those because those, again, going back to what we discussed before, those will motivate you, right? Motivation,
Yep.
very powerful, a very powerful thing to have as a human being. And I think that's one of my points. Now, things that I've learned over the years, that look, failing is good. I like to fail. I I like to fail gracefully. Let's put it this way. It's and
Okay. What do you mean by that?
it's more fail fast, right? So this is a very known concept in software development. If you want to fail, you want to fail fast. Even as an entrepreneur, especially when it comes to startups, you want to fail as quickly as possible in order to learn as quickly as possible, right? And so, what I would say with that is, if you are scared of failure, then maybe being an entrepreneur is not really for you, and that's okay. That's totally fine, because failure and risk is part of the journey of an entrepreneur. Same thing goes with the financial sorry the financial independence and retire early movement. You need to know that you will most likely fail. If you're making investments, those investments can fail. They will fail most likely. And so you need to be prepared.
Well, I'll add a caveat here. I
Sure.
think some investments are riskier than others,
Sure.
but in general, there are safe asset classes that can provide steady returns with lower risk. But do your own research.
Fair enough.
I do think investment is a crucial part to an early retirement plan, and it has a positive expected value.
100%. No, I completely agree.
But as I think within the context of investing in risky endeavors like either risky asset classes or startup investments and etc., those have high risk, and so you should treat it as though it will likely fail.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you should have a backup plan. You should have
Yeah.
a safety net.
Yeah. 100%. No.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
No.
yeah, just wanted to share my
No,
two
it was
cents
a
here.
very good. It was a very caveat, and I do appreciate it. And this is what I meant before. Maybe before I would be like, "What are you talking about?" Now I'm like, okay, that's it's cool. It's cool that you're challenging what I'm saying. So I think I think it's very important to understand that. Also, what I meant, just kind of put another caveat there is maybe not the investment, but your ideals, your expectations. Those can fail, right? Even if your
Yeah,
expectation could be that you're gonna be, if you're planning to go on a more uh safer asset. And again, I'm not saying you shouldn't, you should definitely, but your ideal, your plan, your expectation that it's going to be faster can also fail, right? And that on itself can
correct.
is something that can also fail. So what I'm trying to get at is that failure is good, and you should embrace it. You should embrace it as part of life as a whole, because life is filled with failure in multiple different stages and multiple different levels.
I think this calls for a follow up episode where we talk about risk management and viewing risk as just a game of probabilities. Um, and I think that would be actually a very interesting
Yeah,
episode
yeah, I'd love to
to
do
go
that.
on,
I love to do that.
because if you look at a startup as a project that has X% probability, like let's say 10% probability of succeeding, but if it succeeds, it will have maybe a 1,000 times return. Is this a good option or not? Well, it depends on your risk
Sure.
profile. But
Well,
for many people, if they have the backing to be able to go for two, three, four, five, six of these, why
yeah.
not?
Well, there's a reason why the first stage of a startup investment is called the angel investors, right? Because like only a guardian angel would come in and put some money when your idea doesn't exist, right? That's one of the concepts between an angel investor, right? And so I think that's quite interesting. You're saying that because I definitely agree. I definitely agree.
All right. Jose, before we wrap up, do you want to share any parting thoughts with our listeners?
Sure, of course. Always some parting thoughts. First of all, I hope you enjoyed the episode. It was a bit different. We are trying to experiment with different setups, different combinations and structures for the podcast. We really appreciate all the comments we've been getting. It's been really interesting to hear people say, "Oh yeah, I've listened to the podcast and really enjoyed it. It was really good time." I was like, oh, okay, that is pretty awesome. I'm really happy with it. So what I would say is, if you have thoughts, if you have feedback, please share it with us. We would love to hear it, and we'd love to improve our formula, because we this is an ever changing, ever growing formula that we're working on. Aside from that, I would say not trying to steal from someone else's quotes, but be hungry in and follow what motivates you. If you're if you're on a job that you just feel a bit like, oh, it's always the same, and I'm not saying that it's bad, 9 to 5, people, a lot of people like that stability, and I completely respect it. But it doesn't mean that you can't do something on the side, right? Even if it's, a lot of people have, they love cooking, or they love doing any type of like manual, handicrafts kind of stuff. Do them, try them. If you want to set up a shop on Etsy and try to sell some stuff, do it. It's inexpensive, right? Just learn to do a bit of a cost analysis of what you're trying to do, and obviously remember that money needs to come from somewhere. So if you're just doing it for the fun of it, and especially if you're an adult, and you have responsibilities, which kind of, who wants responsibilities, but if you have them, then obviously calculate those. And I think that's, for example, where Miguel's a lot of Miguel's things come from, like, just calculate those 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 thoughts, those risks, and go for it. Just jump and try it. Worst that can happen is it doesn't work out. You've learned something, and you use that learning in your ever growing life experience.
Yeah, that's perfect, Jose. There's definitely a lot that we could still go on about. We're trying to make a shorter episode today. See, oh, if you guys like it. Um, Thanks everyone for the kind thoughts and kind comments that you've shared, as I mentioned, and let us know if you'd like us to continue this discussion in a future episode. For now, I want to thank Jose for your insights, for sharing your story, for sharing your tips. I think the key takeaway I take from your words is follow your passion, find people who would challenge you to do better and that you can learn from, and fail fast. Don't be afraid of failure, and just build upon it.
100%.
All right, that will make it for our episode for today. Let us know in the comments if you'd like also to engage with us on an episode around risk. That's a topic that I've studied in the past, and I like to frame a lot of my decisions around. So it will help you not only with respect to entrepreneurship, but even decisions in your day-to-day life. So let us know if that's something that would interest you. And until then, we hope you stay cozy by the fireside.